Got a question for you this morning. You ever experience a conflict in one of your relationships? Maybe on the way over here this morning? With your spouse, your family member, a friend, or a coworker. My question for you is, how did it go? How did you deal with it? You know, conflict affects all of us. Some seem to exude conflict and create conflicts. Some of us run away from it and avoid it. But you know, I've spent the better part of the 25 years that I've been doing counseling helping people deal with relationship conflicts of one sort or another. Dealing with conflict is incredibly important. You know, stuck with me a number of years ago when I heard on Focus on the Family, James Dobson's program, a report that was the result of a large study on marriage that had been done recently that found out that the greatest determinant on whether a couple would stay together or get divorced was how they dealt with conflict. That how a couple deals with conflict is the greatest determinant on whether they were going to stay together and make it or whether they were not going to make it and end up divorced. Conflicts in and of themselves are not good or bad. It's how you deal with the conflict that makes or breaks you. And it's not just in marriage, it's in all relationships. So the things I'm going to teach you today are not just pertaining to marriage, they're pertaining to all relationships. Simple principles, not necessarily easy to practice. But my point is, how you deal with the conflict is what's critical. If you deal with it properly, it can become a light which illuminates something that you did not understand in your relationship or in yourself, or maybe in your relationship with God or what God's trying to do. And that light can illuminate something that heretofore you did not realize, and it can produce greater intimacy in your relationship with God or with other people. But if you don't deal with a conflict properly, it will become a fire that destroys you, your relationship, the intimacy, and will ultimately lead to the destruction of that relationship that you're in. So it's how you deal with it. So what I want to teach you today is some simple keys to resolving conflicts. 5 simple keys to resolving conflicts. But before I get into them, I want to just make a statement that's important, because when you talk about communication and conflict, timing is sometimes everything. Timing is everything. Because sometimes people, when they're trying to communicate a sensitive issue or potentially conflictual issue, they pick the wrong time. So what I suggest that you do when you want to talk about something that is potentially conflictual is actually make an appointment and start with a phrase, something like this: I have a frustration, would you be willing to listen? Which kind of lets them know that something's coming. I mean, don't fire from the hip right when they wake up in the morning, when they're, leaving for work and they don't have time, when they're walking in the door tired, or late at night when they're trying to go to bed or they're exhausted. Start with a statement: I have a frustration, would you be willing to listen? Or I have something important to talk about, would you be willing to hear me out? You know, there's a scripture in Ecclesiastes 8:6 that really speaks to this. It says, for there's a proper time or procedure for every matter, even though a man's misery weighs heavily upon him. So it may be that you got this thing inside of you that just got to come out. You got to say it. You got to tell them. But it's really irresponsible of you to just fire it out there without any warning, or to say it at a time when they really can't listen. That's why you need to start with, I have a frustration, would you be willing to listen? If they're not willing to listen, or they can't listen, or circumstances are not good, the responsible thing is to wait until it's a good time to talk, and then to present it in a responsible way. Y'all with me? Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, what are the 5 keys? Key number 1 to resolving a conflict, I actually got from a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, written by Stephen Covey, and it is seek to understand before being understood. Stephen Covey, in his research of highly effective people, found that most people that are successful and highly effective are, for one reason that they are is because when they're dealing with people and they're dealing with conflictual situations, they seek to understand first before being understood. What do most of us do when we're in an argument or a fight or a conflict? We seek to be understood before trying to understand. You know, Proverbs 18:2, the Bible is full of practical quotes like this, says this: a fool finds no pleasure in understanding, but delights in airing his own opinions. What do most people do? Most people don't listen. They talk at each other. When I watch couples do it in my office, they're talking at each other. And then they're reacting to what they think that the other person is saying, not to what they're actually saying. Proverbs 18:13 says, he who gives an answer before he hears, it is folly and shame to him. Let me paraphrase that. He who gives an answer before he hears and really understands what the other person is saying will give a stupid answer. This is the rule with communication. One person speaks and the other person listens. If you get confused as to who is supposed to speak and who listens, go buy a piece of tile from Lowe's, and that represents the floor. One person gets the floor, okay? And whoever's got the floor, they get to speak. While the other person's doesn't have the floor, they don't get to speak. They have to shut up. If they want to speak, they have to get the floor. Then if they get the floor, they get to speak, and the other person listens. And I was once on a program on Passepartout in the morning when Darla Montgomery used to do the morning show, and we were teaching little concepts on communication, and I was talking about this. One person talks and one person listens, and she asked me a question. She said, well, Dudley, how do you determine who talks first and who listens first? And I said, you know, that's a very good question. I said, the more mature person listens first. Or the one that won't shut up, that insists on making their point, the other person listens first. It's that simple. One person talks and one person listens. And you know what I would go so far as to say is that really listening would eliminate 80% of all conflicts. If you just practice this one thing, key number one, seek to understand before being understood through reflective listening or mirroring. That is, just simply saying back to the person what you heard them say. So what you're saying is, and then, is that what you're saying? And then they can correct you if you get it wrong. And then so you say, so what you're saying is, and then you paraphrase what they said, is that what you're saying? If you just did that one thing, that one simple little thing, it would eliminate 80% of all conflicts. So that's key number one. Key number two is speak appropriately at all times. Fight fair and don't hit below the belt. In other words, be angry and sin not. Proverbs 15:28 says this, the heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. You know that in a conflict, when you get heated and it starts to escalate, that the words you speak in anger sometimes create additional problems, don't they? Here you are talking about a problem, and then, you know, they say something, you react to it, then they react to it, and then it gets kind of out of control. We all need to learn to fight fair. Fighting fair means you don't hit below the belt, just like in boxing. Hitting below the belt is like, you know, yelling, screaming, name-calling, bringing up the past, threatening, those kind of things. You can be angry and yet in your anger not sin. You need to learn to be angry and attack the problem, not the person. Proverbs 25 says, "The purposes of a man's heart are deep waters, but a man of understanding draws them out." You know, many times couples, and particularly women, will say to me, they don't ever talk to me. They don't ever share their feelings with me. One of the reasons they don't is because they're afraid of how the other person is going to react, or they have before and it hasn't gone well. The purposes of a man's heart are deep waters. A man of understanding draws them out. A man of understanding knows that the words that they speak can either provoke, wound, shut down, or they can elicit sharing. What I have learned is if you want someone to say how they really feel and you want them to really talk to you, you need to make it safe for them to share. My question is, do you make it safe for your spouse, your children, your coworker, your friend, your employees, the people that you're around to share? Do they feel safe to share with you by the way you react, or are they afraid of the way you're going to react so they don't tell you how they really feel? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. That's key number 2. Speak appropriately at all times. Key number 3 is simply stick to the issue. Stick to the issue. Stick to the issue. One reason conversations sometimes don't go well or they escalate is that people try to deal with too many issues all at once. You know, they have a list, a laundry list, and they start firing them off, and then they're at the wrong time. Or they get sidetracked. They go off on a tangent. Or they react to what they think that the other person said, not to what they actually said. They bring up past issues. They start increasing the volume as if that's going to make the other person hear better. And then they start throwing out these little zingers, and off they go. Ecclesiastes 10:12 through 14 describes such a conversation. "Words from the mouth of a wise man are gracious, while the lips of a fool consume him. The beginning of his talking is folly, and the end of it is wicked madness. Yet the fool multiplies words. No man knows what will happen, and who can tell what will come after him?" This is why you need to think carefully before you go into talking about something that's conflictual. You need to really pray about and think about what is it that you really want to say. And then you got to pick maybe 1 or 2 things and talk about that. There may be other things you want to talk about, but you can only resolve one issue at a time. You want to just spout out? You know, some people are like skunks and some are turtles. Skunks just spray everybody. You want to just vent? That's irresponsible. You know, it's also not responsible to hold everything inside. Skunks need to learn to hold back their anger. Turtles need to learn to speak up. But both need to learn to attack the problem and not the person. You need to pick one issue and resolve one issue at a time. And then